The refrigerator hummed when I found my daughter's signature on the withdrawal slip. Still, I didn't slam the drawer, just traced her handwriting with a shaking thumb. As that hum deepened, it sounded like the house holding its breath, waiting for me to break. While it filled the room, I realized love doesn't end in shouting. It ends in proof. The same hum followed as I locked the safe she'd emptied. That's when I knew. She'll learn what I did. Silence can build a verdict louder than rage. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. The sound was small but sharp, the card reader's mechanical beep, followed by a red flash on the pharmacy's display. Declined. Ray Whitaker blinked once, certain he'd keyed something wrong. The clerk smiled politely, tried again. Same beep, same red light. His stomach tightened. "Try credit," he said, voice steady but hollow. The second attempt failed too. The young cashier apologized like it was her fault. Ray's phone buzzed with a notification, checking balance, $128.07. He stepped outside into the gray Cleveland air, pill bottle in hand, the November wind cutting through his jacket. He opened his bank app, eyes narrowing as the screen filled with unfamiliar transactions. Repeated transfers, each tagged Community Relief LLC. Dozens of them. The total drained most of what he'd saved across 40 years of crawling through crawl spaces and fixing furnaces. That night, the Whitaker kitchen was dim, except for the warm pool of light over the dinner table. Ray waited, arms folded, staring at the lasagna cooling beside him. The clock ticked loud, 10 minutes late, 20. Finally, headlights swept across the window, and Lisa breezed in, wearing a cream-colored coat he didn't recognize. Designer, maybe Italian. The kind of money her teacher's salary couldn't touch. "Sorry, Dad," she said, breathless but bright, placing her purse down. Traffic was nuts. Ray studied her face. "You've been busy." Lisa smiled too quickly. "Mason's been showing me how investments work. He's good with all that." He tilted his head. "Community Relief LLC. That ring a bell?" Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "It's one of Mason's nonprofits, helping veterans, you know. Totally legit." She went back to eating as if the conversation were over. Across the table, Leo, 13 and sharp as a razor, glanced up from his phone. He was quiet, but Ray saw the gears turning. The boy tapped a few times, eyes flicking between the screen and his mother. After dinner, Leo followed his grandpa into the garage, where the smell of motor oil and dust felt like truth. He held out the phone. "Grandpa, look, the transfers, they happened while Mom was at Mason's office. I matched the times to her location history." Ray's breath left him slow, like a leak in a tire. He sat down on the workbench stool, shoulders slumped, but eyes steady. His finger hovered over the app again, moving to his late wife's savings account, the one he'd never touched since she passed. Balance, $0.0. The ledger showed the same name, Community Relief LLC. The old man didn't speak for a long moment. The faint hum of the garage light filled the space. Leo waited, clutching his hoodie sleeves, sensing something irreversible had cracked. Finally, Ray stood. He reached for the framed photo of his wife that hung over the tool rack, her smile, soft and certain, from a better time. The reflection of the fluorescent light ran across the glass like a scar. His voice came out low, trembling not with weakness, but with weight. "You stole home," he murmured, staring at his daughter's handwriting on the withdrawal slip, "from your mother's memory." He set the frame back gently, like putting down a tombstone, and turned toward the house. Behind him, the garage light flickered once before settling back into its tired glow. Leo whispered, almost afraid to break the silence, "Grandpa?" Ray didn't answer. He just looked toward the kitchen window where Lisa's silhouette passed, laughing into her phone, oblivious. His jaw tightened. Something cold and patient took root inside him. He'd built homes his whole life. Now he'd have to rebuild something harder. The truth. The doorbell rang at 7 sharp, just as the evening light faded to that copper shade over Lake Erie. Ray opened the door to find Mason Holt standing there. Slick haircut, tailored jacket, a grin rehearsed to perfection. His handshake was firm but hollow, all surface. "Mr. Whitaker," Mason said, voice smooth as syrup. "I've heard a lot about you. This house, real craftsmanship." Ray nodded once, polite but unreadable. "Built it myself, 40 years ago." Inside, Lisa flitted between kitchen and dining table, pouring wine, laughing too loudly. She looked proud, almost giddy, like she'd brought home someone important. Mason charmed Mrs. Novak once, maybe, Ray thought. He had that salesman ease, every word designed to stick just long enough. He complimented the steak seasoning, the hardwood floors, even Leo's school trophy shelf. But his eyes wandered, scanning like a man measuring value. Between bites, he leaned back and began his pitch. "I'm running a pop-up for veterans. You'd appreciate that kind of grit, Mr. Whitaker. We're building shelters, doing job placements. Only thing holding us back is seed funding. I'd love for you to be part of that. Just a small starter amount, say 5, maybe 10 grand, purely short term. Optics are great, returns even better." Ray's fork paused mid-air. "Optics?" "Public trust," Mason said quickly, flashing a smile. "When people see real families behind the cause, they give more." Across the table, Leo's thumbs worked under the tablecloth, phone screen hidden behind the water glass. He typed Mason Holt into Google, thumb hovering, eyes darting. The search results loaded fast. Wire fraud, plea deal, probation. The boy's stomach dropped. Lisa noticed his distraction and shot him a look. "Put that away," she hissed. Ray glanced from her to Mason. "You're saying you run a veterans charity?" "Exactly," Mason said. "Community Relief LLC. We're making impact happen." Leo swallowed hard, pretending to drop his napkin just to check one more headline. Mason Holt, sentenced to 18 months, released under probation supervision. He glanced at Ray, panic flickering behind his glasses. Ray set his fork down, slow. "Appreciate the dinner talk, but I'm not interested in investments." Lisa's smile faltered. "Dad, come on. You don't even know what it is yet." "I know enough," Ray said evenly. Her tone sharpened. "You've never supported me. Every time I try something new, you shut it down. Maybe you don't like that someone else believes in me." Mason leaned back, arms crossed, wearing that smirk that belonged to men who'd never worked with their hands. "Real men take risks," he said, just loud enough to sting. The air froze. Ray didn't move, his eyes fixed on Mason's smirk, then down to his plate. The silence that followed was heavy enough to rattle the silverware. He didn't bite. Not yet. Lisa pushed back her chair and started clearing plates too early, cheeks flushed. Mason reached for his glass, confident he'd won something invisible. Leo slipped his phone from his lap, thumb pressing share via AirDrop. A soft buzz hit Ray's pocket. He glanced down at his screen, a local news clipping lit up in front of him. Mason Holt sentenced for wire fraud, placed on 5-year probation. He looked up slowly, meeting Mason's eyes across the table. Mason didn't notice. He was still talking about vision, impact, growth. Ray said nothing. He simply folded his napkin, placed it neatly beside his plate, and stared through the man's words like they were smoke. Outside, the last of the daylight slipped behind the lake. Inside, Leo's hand found his grandfather's under the table, small, firm, ready for the storm to come. It was Saturday morning when Mrs. Novak appeared at Ray's front gate, her gray cardigan pulled tight against the wind. In her palm sat a small brass key on a blue plastic tag. "Lisa dropped this in my driveway last night," she said, lowering her voice. Looked like she didn't want anyone to notice. Ray took the key, its teeth worn smooth, a faded sticker marked East Harbor Storage, Unit 143. His stomach knotted. Lisa didn't own much worth storing, at least not honestly. By afternoon, he and Leo were in the old pickup, heading north past the frozen industrial strip by Lake Erie. The air smelled like steel and diesel, a mix that always reminded Ray of unfinished work. They pulled into a long row of metal doors, all painted the same dull blue. The lock clicked open too easily. When Ray rolled the door up, fluorescent light flooded over a wall of cardboard boxes, each labeled with neat black marker. Community relief, donations. He stepped closer. The boxes were pristine, taped, but too light. He slit one open with his pocket knife. Empty. Another. Empty. The whole front row. All air and lies. Leo moved quietly, phone in hand, taking photos. "Grandpa, check this," he said, crouching beside a stack of printed shipping labels. They all pointed to the same post office P.O. box, registered under random initials. On each label, a prepaid burner phone number was listed for pickup confirmation. Ray felt the old ache in his chest tighten, a warning pulse. "This isn't charity," he muttered. Deeper in, under a tarp, Leo found a plastic bin. Inside was a worn black notebook, Mason's handwriting, blocky and rushed. Pages full of names, donation amounts, and fake QR codes scrawled with marker. A whole shadow operation. Donors, receipts, and what looked like laundering paths. Every dollar his daughter thought was helping veterans had been stolen twice, once from donors and once from her own father. Then Leo froze. "Grandpa, look." He held up a stack of deposit slips tucked into the back pocket of the ledger. The loops and curls of the handwriting were unmistakable, Lisa's. She'd written the dates, the amounts, even the signature line. Her fingerprints were all over it. Ray leaned on the metal wall for balance. The cold steel pressed through his jacket, grounding him. The air felt thin, almost metallic. His daughter's name, his late wife's savings, all twisted into this. He shut his eyes for a beat, forcing his breathing to slow. Leo's voice broke the silence, small and scared. "Should we call the cops?" Ray opened his eyes again, steady now. The fury was there, but it had changed shape. Not fire, but iron. He reached for the notebook, tucking it into his coat. "No," he said quietly. "Not yet." He looked at the empty boxes stacked like tombstones, and then at his grandson's wide, waiting eyes. "We'll do this by the book," he said. His tone wasn't revenge, it was procedure. Leo nodded, though his hands still shook. He took one last photo of the empty boxes, time-stamped and geotagged. Ray rolled the door down, the metal screech echoing through the corridor. As the latch locked back into place, the wind outside howled down the row of storage units, hollow and cold. Ray turned toward the truck, the key heavy in his pocket, a secret now burning a hole in his coat. Neither of them spoke as they drove off, but both knew. The next time that door opened, it wouldn't just be them standing there. The envelope was thin, official, and mean. Ray found it wedged between junk mail on a gray Tuesday morning, Cuyahoga County Mortgage Services. The paper crackled as he unfolded it, each line colder than the last. Pre-foreclosure notification. The house he'd built with his own hands. Every nail, every joist, now listed as collateral for a maxed-out home equity line. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. He sat at the kitchen table where the morning sun fought through grime-streaked blinds. Leo leaned over his shoulder, reading faster than he wanted to. "They used your name, Grandpa," the boy said quietly. "But these signatures, they're digital. Look." Ray's eyes flicked to the small print. E-sign authorization. Lisa Whitaker. It didn't make sense. He'd never given her permission to touch the equity line. Never. They moved to the living room computer, Leo's fingers flying across the keyboard. In minutes, he pulled up the transaction logs, side by side with the e-sign certificate. "See the access timestamp?" Leo pointed. That's Mom's phone IP. The system thinks she's you. Ray's throat tightened. How could she? He stopped himself. No answers would help right now. Leo dug deeper, clicking on the attached notary file. Here's the stamp. He zoomed in. The seal looked real until the boy enhanced it. That notary license expired 3 years ago. And, Grandpa, the date? It's the same day Mason had his parole check-in. Ray exhaled slowly, the sound heavy as gravel. The picture was forming, sloppy, criminal, personal. Every piece dragged Lisa further into Mason's orbit. He walked to the garage, the one part of the house untouched by deceit. The old workbench stood under fluorescent light, scarred by decades of repairs. He sat there in the quiet, breathing through the ache, the anger, the disbelief. On the wall hung his late wife's photo again, watching him the way she used to when he'd come home dusty from job sites. He spoke softly, almost to her. The house we built, they're trying to take it. He reached into the drawer where her wedding ring rested in a velvet box, the one she'd left him in her will with a note that said, "Keep it close when the world feels wrong." He opened it, touched the gold band once, then slid it into his shirt pocket. "Not this time," he whispered. "They took money. They won't take dignity." The workbench filled with papers as he laid everything out. Bank statements, notary screenshots, the fake equity line summary. Leo stood beside him, silent but fierce. Ray methodically wrote each damage on a yellow pad, every transfer, every signature, every betrayal. He didn't tremble anymore. His movements were measured, surgical. When the list was done, he reached for his phone. The contact was already there from years ago, Ari Kaplan, consumer protection attorney. He'd met Kaplan once, helping fix his furnace for free when the man was fresh out of law school. Ray stared at the number for a moment, thumb hovering. Then he pressed call. "Kaplan Law," came the voice on the other end. "Mr. Kaplan," Ray said evenly, "I think my daughter and her boyfriend just stole my house. I need to know what comes next." The attorney's tone shifted immediately. "Tell me everything." Ray looked out through the garage window, past the frame of the house he'd built with his bare hands. Somewhere, Mason and Lisa were laughing, thinking the old man wouldn't fight. He adjusted the ring in his pocket, voice steady as steel. "You'll hear it all." And with that, the war began, quiet, precise, by the book. The letter came folded crisp as a blade. Ray slid it open with the corner of a screwdriver, expecting a utility bill. Instead, bold type glared back, pre-foreclosure notice. His chest tightened. The house, his house, stood on that paper like a condemned man. Someone had drained the home equity line until there was nothing left to draw. The kitchen clock ticked loud against the silence. Leo hovered beside him, reading over his shoulder. "They used your login," he murmured, scrolling Ray's phone. "Digital signature, see? Lisa Whitaker." Ray blinked hard. "She doesn't have access to that account." "Not legally," Leo said. His fingers flew over the laptop keys, tracing audit data. Timestamp matches her phone. Mason must have shown her how to spoof it. Ray steadied his hands on the table's edge. The paper trembled anyway. "Find the notary file," he said. Leo opened the attachment, enlarging the seal. The stamp was neat, official, and wrong. "Grandpa, this license expired 3 years ago. Look at the date line." He swallowed. "That's the same day Mason checked in with his parole officer." The old man shut his eyes, the air thinning in his lungs. Betrayal came with a paperwork trail now. You didn't even need to look someone in the eye to rob them. He walked out to the garage, that sacred place that still smelled of sawdust and sweat. The walls were lined with the tools he'd used to raise beams, the same hands that now shook. He sat at his workbench, spread the letter flat, and began listing what was gone: pension draw, savings transfer, equity line. Every line he wrote steadied him. From the pegboard hung a photo of his wife, suntanned and laughing, holding up the first house key they'd earned together. Ray reached for the small velvet box tucked behind his socket set, opened it, and touched her wedding ring. The metal was cool, the memory hot. He slid it into his shirt pocket, close to his heart. "They took money," he whispered, voice steadying, "but they won't take dignity." Leo stood in the doorway, phone in hand, unsure whether to speak. Ray nodded toward the desk. "Print everything, every login, every fake stamp. We'll need proof." The printer hummed to life, spitting out sheets like a slow confession. Ray stacked them neatly, clipped them, and reached for his phone again. His contacts list was short. He scrolled until he found the one name that might still mean fairness in this town: Ari Kaplan, consumer protection attorney. He hesitated only a heartbeat before pressing call. "Ari Kaplan Law Office," came the voice, brisk but warm. "Mr. Kaplan," Ray said, tone low, deliberate. "It's Ray Whitaker. You probably don't remember me. I fixed your furnace once. I need help. Someone forged my name and emptied my home." There was a pause, paper shuffling. "Tell me everything," Kaplan said. Ray looked through the garage window at the house he'd built board by board, the one that held his wife's laughter in its walls. The winter wind scraped against the siding like a warning. He gripped the phone tighter, the ring pressing against his chest. "I'm done losing things quietly." And as the line crackled to life with legal instructions, the fight for the house, and his name, quietly began. The Riverside Cafe gleamed with morning light off the Cuyahoga River, the kind of place where mimosas flowed faster than truth. Lisa had chosen it for the view, all glass and polish, not a speck of blue-collar grit in sight. She wore a crisp white suit that caught every flash of sunlight, and Mason stood beside her like a prop that smiled on cue. Around them, donors and friends filled the tables, sipping champagne, clinking glasses, eating the illusion of success. Ray sat near the back, quiet in his dark flannel, looking every bit like the outsider. Leo sat next to him, small and watchful, pretending to play with his phone, but keeping the camera app open. When Lisa rose to speak, she held her glass high. "I'm beyond proud," she began, her voice a rehearsed melody, "to announce that Community Relief LLC has crossed $50,000 in donations this quarter." The crowd broke into polite applause. "As COO, I take it personally that our mission for veterans stays transparent, efficient, and heartfelt." COO. The words cut deeper than she knew. Ray's fork paused midair. The same company that had bled his accounts dry now had his daughter calling herself an executive. His daughter. Across the table, Mason clapped with a broad, false grin, leaning toward a middle-aged couple in business suits. "You'll love how clean our books are," he told them smoothly. "We issue tax receipts the same day, totally deductible." Ray's jaw tightened. He knew those words were bait. Fake receipts were federal territory, and Mason tossed them around like candy. Leo, without looking up, tapped record on his phone. The camera caught Mason's smile, Lisa's nod, and every false promise echoing through the sunlit room. Lisa spotted Ray then, her eyes narrowing slightly, but she smiled for the crowd. "Of course," she said sweetly. "I couldn't have done this without the strength and independence my dad raised me with." The room chuckled on cue, a polite nod to family. Then her voice dipped, quieter, but sharp enough for only their table to hear. "If Mom were here," she said, "she'd back me. She always wanted me to dream bigger." The words landed like a nail through wood. Ray's hand shook just slightly. His wife's memory, the one thing sacred, used now as a weapon. He turned his face away, pretending to sip his water. Leo felt his grandfather's silence, saw the small tremor in his hand. Without looking up from his phone, the boy slid his small fingers over Ray's knuckles, a silent bridge, an anchor. "It's okay, Grandpa," he whispered just loud enough for him to hear. Ray didn't answer. His eyes glistened, but the tears never fell. Around them, the laughter rose. The forks clinked. The music drifted from the live band. Lisa and Mason toasted again, basking in applause for work that wasn't theirs, for lives they'd stolen. Ray exhaled, long and slow, steadying himself. He looked at Leo, really looked, and something cold and deliberate settled in his gaze. Leo met his eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The boy's phone lay face down now, recording everything, the red light blinking faintly beneath his thumb. Ray gave one small nod, sharp and final. The signal. Permission granted. Across the room, Mason laughed at another donor's joke, unaware that the man he'd mocked at dinner now had every word of his fraud captured in plain daylight. The brunch carried on. Music, chatter, champagne bubbles. But at the Whitaker table, something had changed. The war had just been declared. Detective Elena Cruz met Ray at the diner on St. Clair Avenue, the kind of place where the coffee was burnt and the truth came hot. She'd been on financial crimes detail long enough to spot liars from posture alone. Mason Holt, she said, was skating on paper-thin ice. Still on probation, still one false move away from prison. She flipped open a slim folder. "He's under review," she said. "But under review isn't a sentence. I need more than gossip and suspicion, Mr. Whitaker. I need something that holds up." Ray stirred his coffee, but didn't drink. "He took everything, from my wife's savings, from my house, from my daughter's head." Cruz's eyes softened for half a beat, then sharpened again. "Then make it count. Keep records, screenshots, statements, dates, times, every dollar. You want him gone? Build me a wall of proof I can't climb over." That night, the house hummed with quiet purpose. Leo sat at the kitchen counter, laptop open, multiple tabs running. The glow painted his face pale blue. "The charity site's sloppy," he muttered. "They cloned donor pages. Same text, different names. That's fraud territory." Ray leaned over his shoulder. The screen showed rows of identical testimonials with swapped headshots. Some faces pulled straight from stock photo archives. "Keep copies," he said. "Every page." Leo nodded, fingers flying. Then he found something deeper, a login field hidden in the code, buried behind a blank button at the bottom of the home page. He cracked it open, revealing an admin panel with usernames. One of them read, M. Holt, admin. The initials glared like a confession. "Grandpa, look at this. He's running the site himself." Ray took a slow breath, the weight of confirmation pressing down. "Save it. Print it. Send one copy to yourself, one to me." The printer began spitting evidence into the air, while outside, the winter wind scraped against the windows like sandpaper. At 10:14 p.m., Leo's alert pinged again, a new transaction. Lisa had withdrawn another $4,800 from an account that no longer had her name on it. "Timestamped," Leo said quietly. "Screenshot done." Ray's hands tightened on the table edge. Every withdrawal was another nail in the coffin of trust, yet he couldn't let rage lead. He needed to stay precise. He opened the manila folder Kaplan had prepared, Affidavit of Financial Misappropriation. The attorney's language was calm, clinical, almost merciless in its clarity. Ray read each line before signing, his signature steady at the bottom. Kaplan's notary seal pressed down with a satisfying click. Later, at the precinct, Cruz flipped through the printed pages, donor clones, admin panel captures, withdrawal receipts, affidavit. Her poker face barely moved, but Ray caught the small inhale she didn't mean to take. "You're building a real case here," she admitted. "But Mason's slick. He'll claim it's all clerical error unless I have something airtight." She closed the folder and looked straight at him. "Bring me something I can't argue with." Ray nodded once. "Then that's what I'll bring." Outside, the streetlights threw thin halos across the wet pavement. Leo waited by the truck, the laptop bag clutched close like a secret. Ray climbed in beside him, neither speaking for a long time. From the dashboard, the reflection of the folder's brass clip glinted like a blade. Ray started the engine. Somewhere out there, Mason Holt still believed he could lie his way through probation. He wouldn't believe it for long. The street was quiet in that way Cleveland streets get when the city seems to be holding its breath, only the occasional rumble from the highway and the hush of porch lights. Ray stood across from his daughter's house, wrapped in his old coat, watching through the windshield like a man watching a slow-motion collapse. Under a yellow street lamp, he could see Mason hauling metal into the garage. 2 industrial shredders, the kind businesses use to destroy boxes and paper without thinking twice. Ray's mouth tightened. Those machines didn't shred paper, they shredded evidence. He didn't move. Leo, in the passenger seat, was already working, fingers nimble. He clipped a dash cam to the dash and angled it so the whole driveway was in frame. The little lens stared, out like an eye, obedient and patient. "We'll get it all," Leo said, calm, but with an edge Ray recognized, the same edge that told him the boy would not stop. They'd learned to trust Mrs. Novak's eyes. At 11:45, her text came through. "They're dumping boxes at midnight. Be ready." The simplicity of it hit Ray harder than any shouted warning. She'd always told him when someone was behaving wrong. She'd been right the way old neighbors are, quietly, finely, undeniably. When the clock slid past midnight, the curb grew colder and the night smaller. Leo stepped out with the drone tucked under his jacket like a secret. The alley behind the house was black and narrow, the kind of place shadows like to hide. He launched the drone with the practiced ease of someone who'd grown up online, thumbs gentle, breath steady, and it lifted upward, tiny rotors whining the kind of sound that never sleeps. Above the garage, its camera found motion. 2 men moved like choreography, a handoff at the back of a van, a shadow sliding envelopes into Mason's waiting arms, a quick exchange of cash into plastic bags. Leo watched the feed on his phone, heart thumping against his ribs. He zoomed in until the serial numbers on bills blurred into strips of green. The drone's timestamp and GPS stamped the footage with the authority of truth. Ray watched it all from the truck window, the heat of the old engine still warming his palms. He felt the ring his wife had left him under his fingers, a small weight in his pocket that suddenly felt enormous. He touched it once, like a benediction, then slid it deeper so it would not fall out if the night took him farther than he planned to go. He bowed his head for a second and prayed, not in the pulpit way, but in the way men pray standing in garages, with a mouthful of work and a belly full of regret. When Leo climbed back into the truck, his eyes were bright with evidence and fatigue. "We got handoffs," he said, voice flat with the clarity of someone who'd seen the mechanics of a lie. He handed Ray the phone. The video played again, clean and undeniable. Ray's fingers hovered over the screen, feeling the weight of what proof could do. Save a house, ruin a life, unmake what people had told themselves for months. He opened his laptop from the passenger seat, fingers steady now. He attached the drone footage, the dashcam file, time-stamped photos of the shredders, the shipping labels from the storage unit, the account records Leo had pulled. The message was short. Clinical, evidence package attached. For Detective Cruz, confirm receipt. He added a line. No arrests yet. Do not move without warrant. Ray hit send. The email left his outbox and sailed into a server somewhere between here and Justice. The cursor spun once, twice, then showed the small, awful confirmation that made everything suddenly more real. Leo leaned over and whispered, the same whisper that tasted like both a promise and a threat. "We can end them, Grandpa." Ray wiped his hands on his knees and watched the house's garage light cut a square into the dark, the shredder motors humming inside like bees building a nest. The reply from Detective Cruz could come any minute, or not. Either way, the night had started something that could not be ignored. Snow flurried along Detroit Avenue, soft and deceptive, masking the rot underneath. Leo's breath fogged the truck window as he zoomed in on the storefront across the street, a strip mall mailbox shop tucked between a vape store and a payday lender. He'd been following digital breadcrumbs for days, tracing donation addresses through Mason's charity website. Now he was staring at the physical end of that trail, a rented mailbox numbered 312. "Same logo as on the receipts," Leo whispered. "Community relief." Ray adjusted his cap, eyes fixed through binoculars. "You're sure this is it?" Leo nodded. "Every online donation route's here, and look." He pointed. Two men emerged from the shop, both in dark coats, moving fast. They weren't veterans, they were couriers. One carried a small canvas bag, the kind used for bank drops. The other kept glancing at his phone. They stepped into a white pickup idling by the curb. Ray leaned forward. The license plate glinted under the sun. He read it twice to be sure, then texted it to Detective Cruz. Within minutes, her reply came back. "Trucks registered to a courier company, front name only. No tax filings, no address." "A shell," Ray muttered. "Mason's keeping the cash out of sight." Leo was still filming through the windshield, the camera steady on the men driving off. "Got them leaving with the envelopes," he said. "Time-stamped and GPS logged." While they waited, the world scrolled on. Lisa's social feed pinged with a new post, a bright, filtered selfie of her standing under a banner that read, "Community Relief, 50K, strong for our heroes." She smiled like someone winning a lottery that didn't exist. Ray stared at the photo until his jaw ached. 50,000 stolen, he said under his breath. Within seconds, the comments filled with questions. Where do I get my donation receipt? Can you share your charity license? How are the funds distributed? The thread went quiet after that. No replies, just likes and emojis, a social graveyard. In the cab of the truck, Ray began spreading papers across the dash, printouts, screenshots, handwritten notes. "This is all one web," he said. "The mailbox, the site, the withdrawals, every fake donor name." He connected them with red pen lines, methodical, angry, but disciplined. Leo's laptop pinged as he cross-checked payment handles. The same usernames appeared across multiple donation apps, all leading back to Mason's initials. They worked in silence, the truck heater hissing softly. Ray's fingers moved like a craftsman's, precise, measured, relentless. For years, those hands had built homes. Now they were building a case, brick by brick. When the last printout was taped to the board, Ray picked up his phone and called Kaplan. "It's ready," he said. "Every transaction, every timestamp, every link." Across town, Kaplan printed the file bundle, eyes widening at the trail of deceit. He began drafting a preservation demand to the mailbox store, in order to freeze records before Mason could destroy them. The legal gears were starting to turn, quietly but fast. By the time the sun dipped low, Ray's dashboard looked like a war map. Leo leaned back, exhausted, but the faintest flicker of triumph crossed his face. "He thinks no one's watching," the boy said. Ray didn't answer. His gaze stayed locked on the mailbox store across the street, its neon open sign humming against the dark. Somewhere inside, the evidence of every stolen dollar was waiting, still unshredded, still reachable, for now. By the time March rolled in, the air over Cleveland carried that false spring smell, mud, thaw, and anxiety. Inside Ari Kaplan's office, the hum of a scanner filled the silence. Piles of documentation covered his desk, printouts from Ray, screenshots from Leo, and pages of routing histories that mapped Mason's greed like arteries. Kaplan adjusted his glasses, typing a final line on the IRS portal before pressing submit. The whistleblower tip went through with a soft, digital chime, but its echo felt louder than any courtroom gavel. "That's the first domino," Kaplan said. "The tax man doesn't need motive, just math. If Mason's been taking fake deductions under charity work, this will smoke him out." Ray nodded, expression carved from stone. "Let him feel pressure where it hurts, the kind he can't charm his way out of." Across town, Mason was pacing his condo, jaw tight, a phone pressed to his ear. "They're sniffing around," he muttered. Lisa sat on the couch, eyes red, scrolling through news alerts. "Then what do we do?" she asked, voice thin. Mason's tone turned cold. "Keep cool. Delete everything. Chats, texts, files. If there's no trail, there's no crime." She hesitated but obeyed, thumb trembling as she cleared her phone. Messages vanished in waves, months of digital deceit erased into silence. Mason smiled faintly, satisfied. "See? Easy. You just stay quiet." But silence doesn't erase everything. That night, in the dim glow of Ray's garage, Leo leaned over his laptop, running recovery software he'd downloaded from a forensics forum. Line by line, fragments appeared on the screen, ghost files, half-sentences, old timestamps. Then the first full message surfaced. He froze, then called softly. "Grandpa, you should see this." Ray joined him, eyes narrowing as Leo scrolled through a string of restored chats. The last one was clear. "Move Ray's money, fast, before he checks the balance." Lisa's name was right there. No excuses, no misunderstanding. Ray stood very still, hands braced on the table. He'd imagined Mason pulling the strings, yes. But seeing his daughter write those words made the betrayal pulse in his veins. For a long moment, the only sound was the quiet hum of the old fluorescent light. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "Save every word, every timestamp, make copies." Leo did, labeling each file with meticulous care. The weight of truth felt heavier than any lie. By morning, Kaplan had the messages printed, sealed, and ready. He called Detective Cruz, who was already ahead of him. "We've got a judge who owes me nothing," she said. "Quiet, clean, no leaks. We'll ask for a limited warrant. Financial records, no arrests yet." "Keep it quiet," Ray said. "They'll panic if they smell it coming." Cruz's tone hardened. "Good. Let them sweat. The walls are already closing." That night, Ray sat in the dark living room, the folder of evidence beside him. Outside, the snow melted into thin streams that wound toward the gutter. He thought of Lisa as a little girl, balancing on that same curb, arms wide for balance. Now she was drowning in something far deeper than rainwater. He didn't look away, not anymore. Across the city, Mason poured himself another drink, unaware that the IRS had his name, his LLC, and every fake dollar ready to be dissected. The circle was closing, and when it locked shut, there'd be nowhere left to run. The pop-up fundraiser was supposed to look like a celebration. Folding tables, bright banners, coffee urns steaming in the cold wind off Lake Erie. Lisa had even hired a student jazz trio from the local high school to give the morning a community feel. But the smiles were brittle, the crowd thin. The air carried something different now, suspicion. Ray parked a block away, camera ready, watching from the driver's seat. He didn't need to be inside to feel the temperature drop. The rumor had spread. People wanted receipts, proof, answers. And the first one to ask wasn't a journalist or a cop. It was a retired teacher named Mrs. Elkins, the kind of woman who still saved every scrap of paper she ever received. Lisa was midway through her practice pitch when Mrs. Elkins stepped forward, clutching a small donation form. "I gave $200 to your Veterans Drive," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "That was 3 months ago. I never got a tax receipt. Where are our receipts, dear?" The microphone squealed in the silence. Lisa blinked, her smile straining. "We're processing them," she said. "It's tax season. Lots of filings. You know how that goes." But Mrs. Elkins didn't back down. "You said funds were going to housing programs. I checked. No one's heard of you." The crowd started murmuring. Cell phones lifted, cameras pointed. Lisa's composure cracked. "You people think everything's a scam," she snapped, voice rising. "We're doing real work here. You don't get to judge what you don't understand." The jazz trio stopped mid-song. The footage would later show Lisa's face, flushed, furious, cornered. That clip hit local social feeds before noon, captioned, "Charity COO explodes on donor." Within hours, it had thousands of views and comments that bit harder than any courtroom cross-exam. By the time Mason saw it, his jaw was tight enough to crack. He tossed his phone onto the motel dresser, where he and Lisa were holed up counting envelopes. "You just made us famous," he said. "Go dark. Delete your accounts. I'll handle the rest." Lisa sat on the edge of the bed, eyes hollow. It was one woman, Mason. One. "Doesn't matter. Eyes are on us now." He stuffed stacks of small bills into a duffel bag, muttering numbers under his breath. Outside, Leo's laptop glowed in the darkness of the car. He had geotagged their motel through a metadata trace from the video Lisa had posted earlier. Her reflection caught in a window, the sign's coordinates right behind her. "They're at the Harbor Light Motel," he whispered. Across the lot, Ray sat behind the wheel of his pickup, a handheld camera resting on the dash. His pulse stayed even. The camera's red light blinked, recording the figures moving behind the curtains of room 27. A block over, Detective Cruz's unmarked sedan idled, headlights off. Through the windshield, she could see the same shadow play. Mason pacing, Lisa sitting still. Everyone waited. The retired cop, the grandfather, the detective, the boy. 4 lives orbiting one cheap motel room that smelled like smoke and guilt. Inside, Mason's voice rose again, angry and careless. "We just need one more day, Lisa. One. Then it's all washed clean." Ray zoomed in through the lens, capturing it all. The night felt wired, alive, like a fuse burning unseen beneath the asphalt. The evidence was piling up, and somewhere in that room, the clock had just started ticking louder. The glow from Leo's laptop was the only light in the room. Lines of code, logins, and timestamps flickered across his glasses as he muttered to himself, "He's trying to kill it, Grandpa." On the other side of the screen, Mason's cursor moved fast, deleting donor lists, wiping transaction histories, taking the charity's fake website apart piece by piece. Ray leaned over his grandson's shoulder. "Can you stop him?" Leo shook his head, fingers already flying. "No, but I can catch him doing it." He captured a screenshot of the admin console, Mason's username at the top, M. Holt, admin, glowing like a signature on the crime itself. Each deletion left a trail in the access log, a record even Mason didn't know he was creating. Then Leo froze. "Wait, look at the IP address." He highlighted the string of numbers at the bottom corner of the page. "That's Mom's apartment router." Ray exhaled through his nose, long and quiet. Lisa's fingerprints again, this time digital. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The betrayal was its own sound. The next morning, Detective Cruz met them in the diner booth that had become their unofficial war room. Her coat still smelled faintly of rain. "You've got a strong case," she said, flipping through the printouts Leo had given her. "But it's all digital. Mason will say the logs are forged or that someone spoofed him. I need something physical, money in hand. Give me the one thing he can't talk his way out of." Ray looked at her steadily. "You want bait." "I want proof," she corrected. "The kind judges like, cash in his possession tied to a fake donation." Back home, Ray counted out $2,100 bills from what was left of his savings. Each one felt heavier than the last. He flattened the stack on the workbench, smoothing the corners as if he were back laying floor tiles. Steady, exact, irreversible. Leo watched quietly, then said, "Let me make it traceable." He opened a design program and built a QR code that looked like a simple payment link, but carried embedded data, GPS tags, transaction signatures, invisible markers. "When he scans this, it'll log the device, time, and location," the boy said. "A digital fingerprint." Kaplan notarized the serial numbers of each bill and photographed them before sealing them in a small envelope. "You're sure about this?" he asked. Ray nodded. "He took everything else. He won't take our nerve. That night, in a dim cafe across from the river, Mason sat with his usual swagger, eyes darting for attention. He tapped his phone and smirked. "Untraceable cash," he told Lisa. "That's the beauty of paper. It disappears." Lisa looked uncertain, but she smiled anyway, trying to keep up with his confidence. Mason slid the envelope into his jacket pocket, like it was nothing, like he'd done it 100 times. Across the street, Ray sat in his truck, camera running, recording the handoff exactly as Kaplan had planned. The timestamp blinked in the corner of the screen. Inside the cafe, Mason clinked his coffee mug against Lisa's. "Too easy money," he said. Ray's phone vibrated with the alert, Leo's tracker pinging green. The bait was live, trace logged, undeniable. He didn't smile, didn't move. He just whispered, "Got you." Outside, the city hummed on, unaware that a single envelope had just sealed a man's fate. Detective Cruz was methodical when she worked, every word recorded, every motion deliberate. In her office, the envelope of cash sat under the desk lamp, edges crisp, the bills lined up like soldiers awaiting orders. She read each serial number out loud, her voice low and measured, while Kaplan filmed the process with his phone for verification. Each note was logged on paper, photocopied, and tagged with a microdot of UV ink. When she sealed the envelope, she looked up at Ray. "Once this leaves your hands, it's bait. You can't pull back. You understand?" Ray nodded. "I've been ready." She slid the envelope toward him. "Then let's finish this." The next morning, the air was cold and sharp, the kind of day that made everything feel brittle. The cafe on the riverfront was nearly empty, its windows fogged from the espresso machines. Lisa sat in the corner booth, stirring a cup she wasn't drinking. She looked tired, more hollow than he'd ever seen her, but the diamond earrings still glinted under the soft lights. Ray walked in, slow, envelope in hand, his old work jacket out of place among the glass tabletops and lattes. She looked up and smiled the way daughters do when they're trying to rewrite guilt into charm. "Dad," she said lightly, "you didn't have to come in person." He slid the envelope across the table. "You said Mason needed it quick, so here." His tone was flat, unreadable. From the booth behind them, Leo angled his phone just right, the camera peeking through the gap in the seat. The red recording light reflected faintly off the salt shaker. He whispered to himself, "Frame's clean, audio's good." A few minutes later, Mason appeared, slick coat, expensive cologne that couldn't hide the sweat of panic. He greeted Lisa with a kiss to the cheek and turned to Ray with that same practiced grin. "Mr. Whitaker, always a pleasure." Ray didn't answer. He just nodded once and gestured toward the envelope. Mason picked it up, feeling the weight. "Nice. Cash, no paper trail. We'll split it later," he said to Lisa, sliding it into his jacket pocket. His tone was casual, but his eyes darted to the door, already planning his next move. Lisa leaned in and kissed him on the mouth. Quick, almost desperate. Leo's camera caught everything. The kiss, the handoff, the envelope passing from table to coat pocket. The timestamp burned onto the footage in clean white numbers. Across town, Kaplan's printer whirred to life as he added the final verification page to the file. The notary seal pressed deep into the corner, cold and official. Each moment of the exchange was logged with the precision of a watchmaker. At the precinct, Cruz received Ray's text. "Transfer complete." She scribbled the time into her log, underlining it twice. "It's live," she told her partner. "We move when the evidence chain clears." In the cafe, Mason laughed too loudly at something Lisa said. Ray stood, putting on his coat. "Take care of yourselves," he muttered. Mason waved lazily, unaware that his jacket now carried the proof of everything. Outside, the wind came hard off the river, snapping Ray's collar as he walked back to the truck. He didn't look back, but his phone buzzed once, Leo's voice in his ear, quiet but steady. Got the footage, Grandpa. Everything. Ray stared through the windshield, jaw set. The trap wasn't just bait anymore. It was closing. It started with whispers, local talk radio, a blip on the evening news, the kind of rumor that spreads faster than confirmation. Sources close to the county's financial crimes unit say a grand jury is being assembled to review a local veterans charity under investigation for fraud. The announcer's voice was calm, but every word landed like thunder in Lisa's apartment. She stood frozen in the kitchen, her phone vibrating nonstop, donors asking questions. Friends pulling back. Even the charity's social media page had gone dark. Mason sat at the counter, scrolling his feed, jaw tight. They don't have proof, he muttered. They're fishing. Lisa turned on him, voice cracking. Fishing? They're saying grand jury, Mason. That's not fishing. Her hands shook as she grabbed her purse. Someone fed them this. Someone who wants to destroy me. When she stormed into Ray's house an hour later, Leo was at the dining table working on homework. The front door slammed so hard the frame rattled. You, she snapped, pointing at her father. You've been talking to reporters, haven't you? You think ruining me makes you the good guy now? Ray looked up from his chair by the window. You ruined yourself, Lisa. Her voice trembled, half fury, half fear. You don't get to judge me. You never believed in anything I tried. You've been waiting to see me fail. Leo stood, his voice clear, almost too calm for his age. Mom, stop. Stay out of this, she hissed. He didn't. You stole from us. The words cut through the room. Lisa froze, the air leaving her like a punctured tire. For a heartbeat, she looked like the girl she used to be, small, scared, lost. Then she spun and left, without another word. Later that night, Ray's voicemail light blinked red. He pressed play. Mason's voice came through low and venomous. You think you're clever, old man? You want to play hero? Get your badge ready. I know where you live. Keep your mouth shut or I'll shut it for you. Ray listened once, then again, this time hitting record on his phone. The message saved cleanly, every threat sharp and undeniable. He sent it to Detective Cruz with a short text. You wanted the nail? This is it. By morning, Cruz was in front of a county judge with a file so thick it bent her briefcase. Probable cause established, she said, voice steady. The judge didn't need convincing. He signed the warrant with a heavy pen stroke that sounded to Cruz like the first crack in a wall. Back at the precinct, she called Ray. We've got the warrant. Property search, electronics, bank accounts. We move tonight. Ray didn't ask for details. He just looked toward the window, where dawn painted the sky gray over the frozen street. He could almost hear it already, the sound of sirens cutting through quiet neighborhoods, the reckoning that had been building for months. As dusk fell, the hum of police radios filled the air. Somewhere across town, Mason's bravado was running out, and Lisa's fear was turning real. Leo stood beside Ray on the porch, watching a cruiser roll by in the distance, its lights faint but growing closer. Ray's hand tightened on the railing. It's time, he said. The morning broke cold and colorless, a Cleveland sky hanging low over the houses like wet steel. At exactly 8:12 a.m., 3 unmarked cars turned onto Brookhaven Lane. The sound of tires crunching frost was the only warning before uniformed officers moved in, calm, precise, and wordless. From the curb across the street, Ray stood with his hands deep in his coat pockets. He didn't blink when the first officer lifted the garage door on Lisa's house. The metallic rattle echoed across the quiet block. Inside, the air smelled like burnt paper and plastic. 2 shredders sat in the corner, their motors still warm, cords trailing like veins. Detective Cruz stepped forward, eyes scanning the scene. Get photos before anyone touches anything. She crouched near a half-open toolbox on the workbench. Inside, wrapped in a rag, was an envelope. Ray recognized the one he'd handed over in that cafe. The bills were marked, edges still crisp. A dusting team lifted fingerprints within minutes. Mason Holt's name was written all over them, literally. Ray didn't move closer. He just stared at the doorway where Lisa stood in her robe, face pale, hair tangled from sleep. Her voice came out sharp, almost cracking. "What is this? You can't just... This is my house." Cruz didn't answer. She motioned to an officer. "Secure the electronics." Two tech agents entered, unplugging laptops, bagging tablets, snapping photos of every device on the counter. From the street, Leo watched through the truck window, his small face half hidden behind the dashboard. He'd already texted Cruz the password hints, pet names, birthdays, the street where Lisa grew up. He didn't need to see the rest. He knew what was on those drives. Lisa's shouts turned to sobs as Mason stumbled out from the back door, half-dressed, phone already at his ear. "Get my lawyer," he barked, "right now." His confidence had a crack in it now, a strain that made him sound less like a boss and more like a man running out of exits. One of the detectives announced, "We've got the transfers, all tied to community relief accounts." Cruz turned to Ray. "This is solid," she said quietly, her voice stripped of ceremony. He nodded, eyes steady. "Do what you have to do." An officer led Lisa down the driveway toward the cruiser, her bare feet red against the concrete. Mason followed a few minutes later, cuffed, jaw tight, still trying to look in control for a world that had stopped believing him. The cameras from local news were already pulling up at the end of the block, their lenses catching the flashes of handcuffs and broken pride. Ray stayed where he was. No triumph, no smile, just the quiet ache of a father who'd outlived trust. Cruz gave a short nod before turning away, her radio crackling with confirmation from the booking desk. "Mugshots are live," someone said through static. Ray glanced once toward his house down the street, the porch light still burning from the night before. It flickered in the cold, steady and faint, as the squad cars rolled off with the people who'd once called him family. By mid-morning, Kaplan's office was filled with the mechanical hum of servers and the faint scent of burnt toner. The forensic team had just delivered the digital pull, an evidence drive marked Community Relief LLC. It was heavier than it should have been, a dense record of every lie dressed as charity. Kaplan slid the USB into his computer and began opening folders, donor lists, cloned receipts, shell invoices. Each document was a nail in the coffin Mason and Lisa had built with counterfeit goodwill. One folder stopped him cold, audio files. Inside were voice memos recorded on Lisa's phone. Kaplan clicked the first one, his face tightening at the sound of her voice. "Dad will pay," Lisa said, casual, almost laughing. "He always does. He'll cover it. He'll cave. He can't stand to see me fail." He hit pause, then called Ray. "You should hear this yourself," Kaplan said quietly. An hour later, Ray sat in the leather chair across from him, a small speaker between them. The waveform moved like a heartbeat on the screen. He listened once, then again. Each time the same voice, his daughter's. Flat, certain, transactional. When the recording ended, the silence in the room thickened. Kaplan waited, not sure if he should speak. Ray's hands were folded in his lap, veins rising like blue cords under his skin. "She sounds like a stranger," he said finally, voice soft but frayed, like she's reading lines someone wrote for her. Kaplan turned off the monitor. "We can submit these to the restitution filing. The donors have a right to recover what's theirs. So do you." Ray nodded slowly. "Authorize it. Every penny. They trusted her because they trusted my name. That's on me, too." When he got home, Leo was already working on the laptop, building something meticulous, a statement. The boy looked up. "We need to say it first before they twist it. Something honest. We believed in a lie, but we won't hide from truth." Ray nodded again, letting the words hang. He'd built homes that lasted decades, but this rebuilding, felt heavier. Mrs. Novak knocked around dusk, holding a covered dish that smelled like beef stew. "You need to eat," she said softly. "Justice takes energy." He tried a spoonful, but it turned to dust in his mouth. "Thank you," he murmured. When she left, he set the bowl aside, untouched. The files still played faintly in his head. Lisa's laugh, the easy cruelty of her certainty. He stood by the window, watching headlights pass along the frozen street. The anger that had burned hot for weeks cooled into something harder, cleaner, a resolve that no longer shook. Down the hall, Leo's printer hummed, spitting out the final draft of their court statement. Each page stacked neatly beside Ray's folder of evidence. He touched the ring in his pocket, then the affidavit on the table. There'd be no forgiveness tonight, only preparation. The morning the report hit the county office, Mason Holt's luck finally snapped. His probation officer, a tired man with a gray mustache and an unshakable memory for faces, scrolled through the email from Detective Cruz. Attached were photographs, timestamps, and one damning line of data, marked bills recovered in Holt's possession. That was all it took. The violation triggered automatically. 2 hours later, a cruiser rolled into the parking lot of a BP station off Route 90. Mason was there, leaning against his car, fueling up, duffel bag slung over one shoulder. The officers moved in quiet formation. "Mason Holt," one said, badge out. "Probation violation. Hands where we can see them." For a split second, Mason thought about running. Then he saw the flash of body cams, the stillness of everyone around him. He dropped the bag. The zipper slid open on impact, spilling cash across the asphalt. Some of the bills were stamped, the faint UV markings visible even in daylight. He was cuffed before he could say a word. His voice broke only when they read him his rights. At home, Ray was tightening a hinge on the kitchen cabinet when the phone rang. He almost didn't answer, but something in the ringtone made him stop. Lisa's number. Her voice came through jagged, desperate. "Dad, please, they're saying Mason. He's been arrested. They're holding me too. They think I knew. I didn't know." Ray's hand stayed steady on the counter. "You knew enough." "I didn't mean for this," she said, words dissolving into sobs. "I just wanted to fix things. You have to believe me." Ray's tone didn't rise. It only thinned, iron flat. "Return what isn't yours." There was silence on the line, just breathing, shallow and scared. Then the call cut off. Later that afternoon, Cruz stood outside the county detention center, paperwork tucked under her arm. Lisa sat across the table inside, eyes swollen, hair pulled into a messy knot. "Lisa," Cruz said evenly, "we both know how this works. You cooperate, I can make sure the court sees that. Keep covering for him. And you go down with him." Lisa sniffed, wiping at her face. "It was all Mason," she said quickly. "He made me sign. He told me it was just business." Cruz didn't even blink. "We've heard that line before. Think about your kid." Lisa stared at the table, her reflection bent in the metal. In the corner, Leo sat beside Ray, earbuds in, listening to the string of voicemails Lisa had left before the arrest. He didn't say anything, just tapped the save icon one by one, archiving them all. Outside, the winter wind pressed against the courthouse windows, muffling the sound of Mason being led into holding. For the first time in months, Ray didn't feel anger, just the heavy calm of a man watching the storm he'd warned about finally arrive. But it wasn't over, not yet. The letter from the bank arrived like a second sunrise, quiet, unexpected, carrying more weight than any piece of mail had a right to. Ray stood by the kitchen window as he read it twice, lips moving without sound. Foreclosure proceedings halted pending investigation of irregular transactions. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel like it was slipping away beneath his feet. Kaplan called an hour later. "We got their attention," he said, voice brisk, professional, but threaded with relief. The bank's compliance team reviewed the digital signatures. They're calling them highly suspect. I've already filed a motion to void the entire HELOC line. If the judge agrees, every draw under Lisa's authorization gets reversed. Ray leaned against the counter, eyes tracing the walls of the home he'd built with his own hands, the trim he'd cut, the cabinets he'd stained with his wife the summer before she passed. "So it comes back?" he asked quietly. "Piece by piece," Kaplan replied. "It's slow, but yes, it'll come back." Across town, Lisa sat in a holding room, wrists trembling as she read the same update on a printed sheet her public defender slid across the table. Home may revert to original owner, pending void of fraudulent loan. Her throat tightened. She looked at her lawyer, panic rising. "That house was supposed to be mine. It's all I had left." The lawyer didn't meet her eyes. "You'll want to talk to your father about that." Later that evening, Ray heard the knock before Leo did. The sound wasn't angry. It was hollow, almost rehearsed. Lisa stood on the porch, coat half zipped, a shadow of who she'd been. "Dad, can we talk?" He hesitated, then opened the door just enough for her to step inside. The air between them was colder than the February night outside. "I heard the bank's dropping the foreclosure," she said. "That's good. Maybe we can fix this. Find a family solution." Ray looked at her for a long moment. His voice was quiet, but every word cut clean. "Family protects family. That's not what you did." She blinked hard, the words hitting their mark. "I made mistakes, but I'm still your daughter." From the couch, Leo unplugged his headphones and looked up, eyes steady. "No, Mom," he said softly. "You stopped being family when you let him hurt us." The silence that followed was long and sharp. Lisa's eyes flicked between them, father and son united, not in anger but in resolve. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and turned for the door. When it closed, Ray exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. Kaplan's voice came through his phone a few minutes later. "Judge scheduled a hearing. Thursday, 9 a.m. You'll want to be there." Ray looked around the living room, the scuffed floors, the framed photo of his wife, the faint hum of the furnace he'd repaired 100 times. "Yeah," he said, steady now. "I'll be there." Outside, the porch light flickered against the cold. The house wasn't safe yet, but for the first time, it was back in play. The courthouse conference room smelled faintly of old coffee and tension. Mason sat across the table from his lawyer, a man in a sharp suit and an even sharper voice. "We're willing to talk," the lawyer began, his tone slick but practiced. "My client accepts partial liability if the court agrees to time served and community supervision. He cooperates, you skip trial, and everyone saves face. Detective Cruz didn't even blink. You want leniency for wire fraud, theft, and falsifying records? Not happening." She folded her arms. "The plea starts with prison time. He earned it." Mason's grin faltered just slightly. "You people are unbelievable," he muttered. Across the hall, Lisa sat with her own attorney, hands twisting a tissue into thin strings. "I can help," she said, voice trembling. "I'll give them the passwords, email accounts, whatever they need. I didn't make those transfers. I just followed his instructions." Her lawyer glanced at the prosecutor's table. "She's asking for probation and restitution payments. No jail." Ari Kaplan, seated beside Cruz, didn't bother hiding his disapproval. "Restitution comes first," he said firmly. "The donors, every one of them, and Mr. Whitaker's mortgage before that. No more loopholes, no more deals that protect the thieves before the victims." Lisa flinched at the word thieves. Kaplan didn't soften it. In the back of the room, Leo sat quietly, laptop open, presenting his work to the district attorney. He'd spent days building a clear visual record of everything, every transaction, every fake receipt, every timestamp. The slides were simple, color-coded, undeniable. "You don't need to understand code," he told the DA. "Just look at the flow." The DA, a woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness, leaned forward, studying the images. "You made this yourself?" Leo nodded. I just wanted people to see it clean. No excuses. She smiled faintly. I wish half my staff were this organized. Outside the room, a local reporter waited with a camera crew, hoping to catch Ray for a quote. When he stepped out, the microphone was already in his face. Mr. Whitaker, how does it feel seeing justice finally? He cut her off gently, his voice calm but immovable. Justice isn't a feeling, and I'm not here for clout. He walked past the cameras without another word. Inside, the DA closed her file and looked at Cruz, then at Kaplan. The evidence is airtight. We'll give them a short window to accept the plea. After that, we go to trial. Cruz exhaled. Good. Through the glass, Ray could see Mason whispering furiously to his lawyer, Lisa staring at her folded hands. Kaplan gathered his papers, sliding them into his briefcase with precision. Checkmate's coming, he murmured. No one smiled. In this kind of game, even victory left a bruise. The door closed behind them, and the sound echoed down the empty hall, like the ticking of a clock counting down the last moves on the board. The courtroom was smaller than it looked on television. No sweeping drama, just polished wood, worn carpet, and the quiet rustle of consequence. 12 chairs stood in the juror box, each filled with an ordinary citizen summoned to weigh a lifetime's worth of choices. The air buzzed with the faint hum of cameras outside in the hallway, where reporters waited for quotes and sound bites. Inside, though, everything was still. Ray sat at the back, hands folded, expression unreadable. He'd been asked to take the stand later, but for now, he was just another spectator, one who knew every detail carved into the case, like scar tissue. Lisa sat at the defense table, pale under the courtroom lights. Her eyes darted across the gallery until she found Leo. He sat next to Kaplan, his suit a size too big, his posture straight, his face calm, but older than his years. When she caught his eye, something in her broke. Tears welled, and she looked down quickly, afraid of what she might see reflected in her son's stare. Across the aisle, Mason sat motionless beside his lawyer, jaw tight, a faint smirk fighting to hold. Every few minutes, he'd glance toward Ray, unblinking, deliberate, the same stare that used to carry charm, but now only carried defiance. Ray didn't look away. The silence between them said more than any testimony could. Detective Cruz was the first witness. She stood tall, uniform pressed, voice steady as she outlined the investigation, how the marked cash was recorded, notarized, and tracked from Ray's hands to Mason's pocket. The bills recovered, she said, holding up photographs, matched the serial numbers verified by the bank and witnessed under oath. Mason's attorney tried to interrupt, but Cruz didn't flinch. Every transaction was documented. There's no margin for doubt. Then it was Kaplan's turn. The attorney walked slowly to the projector, his tone quiet but firm. This case isn't about numbers, he said, facing the jury. It's about trust, and what happens when trust is sold. He clicked the remote, and a chart filled the screen. Arrows, dates, transfers, money flowing like a bloodstream infected. He pointed with precision, his cadence smooth, patient. These weren't accounting errors. They were deliberate extractions, masked as generosity. The jurors followed his hand, some frowning, some scribbling notes. Then Kaplan nodded toward Leo. The visual aid you're about to see was prepared by the victim's grandson. He's 13. Leo rose, palms slightly shaking as he cued his presentation. On the screen, his deck unfolded. Clean graphics, simple language, no theatrics. A single line traced every stolen dollar from donor to fake charity to Mason's accounts. Then it stopped, landing on a still frame, the cafe footage of Mason pocketing the envelope. The room fell silent. One juror leaned forward, elbows on knees. Another mouthed the word, "Wow." From the back row, Ray exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly. Outside, the cameras clicked through the hallway glass. Inside, 12 people had just seen the truth, raw, plain, undeniable. and the trial was only beginning. The defense attorney rose from his chair with the confidence of a man who'd done this dance 100 times. He buttoned his jacket, glanced toward the jury, and walked to the witness stand where Ray sat. "Mr. Whitaker," he began smoothly, "you seem like a man who's had some grievances with my client." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Would you say this entire case stems from personal resentment? From a family feud?" Ray didn't move. His hands rested flat on the rail, calloused and steady. "No," he said. The attorney circled him, voice dipping low. "You're angry, though. Your daughter chose someone you don't approve of. This isn't about money. It's about control, isn't it?" From the gallery, Lisa's face twisted. Mason smirked, arms crossed like a man who still believed charm could buy freedom. Ray's gaze didn't leave the attorney. His tone didn't rise. "I built furnaces for 40 years, he said evenly. "I know heat from light. What you're calling anger is truth. It burns steady, not wild." The courtroom stilled. Even the stenographer looked up. The lawyer shifted tactics. "So you admit this was personal?" "I admit my name was used to steal from veterans, from neighbors, from my wife's savings," Ray cut in, voice quiet but sharp. "That's not personal. That's theft." Murmurs rippled through the benches. The judge tapped her gavel once. "Counselor, stay on the evidence." The attorney forced a laugh. "Of course, Your Honor. Evidence. Let's talk about this so-called digital proof." He turned to the projection screen, trying to reclaim control. "A 13-year-old compiled it, yes? His grandson?" Leo sat up straight in the gallery. The judge's brow lifted. "He did," Ray answered, "and he did it right." Detective Cruz stepped forward with a USB drive. "Your Honor, these are the authenticated screenshots recovered from the charity's server. Metadata confirmed." The bailiff dimmed the lights. On the screen, Leo's clean diagrams appeared again. Transaction logs, time-stamped chats, Mason's user login visible in the corner. The attorney leaned in, looking for an error. There wasn't one. Cruz handed printed copies to the clerk. "Verified by the Financial Crimes Lab," she said. Then Kaplan stood, walking to the evidence table. "One more item, Your Honor." He lifted the clear plastic bag containing the marked bills, those same 2000s, edges tagged with faint UV ink. At the judge's nod, the bailiff carried the envelope toward the jury box. One by one, the jurors leaned forward, examining the bills under the courtroom light. A faint purple glow shimmered across the serial numbers. Someone gasped softly. Another juror whispered, "That's the same envelope from the video." The attorney tried to object, but his voice faltered. The room had already seen enough. Ray's eyes didn't leave Mason, who now stared down at the defense table, knuckles white. The judge cleared her throat, voice level but firm. "The record will reflect the evidence entered." Cruz exchanged a glance with Kaplan. It wasn't victory yet, but the weight had shifted. And in that silent, electric moment, everyone in the room felt it. The truth had finally found its heat. The air inside the courtroom felt heavier than usual, dense with the kind of silence that comes only before a verdict. Reporters crowded the hallway outside, their camera flashes flickering through the narrow window on the door. Inside, 12 jurors filed back into their seats. Faces pale, eyes locked ahead. Ray sat still in the second row, the weight of months pressing on his shoulders. Leo sat beside him, hands folded around his notebook. The foreman rose, paper trembling slightly in his grip. The judge's voice cut the stillness. "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." She nodded. "Please read the findings." The foreman cleared his throat. "On the count of wire fraud, guilty. On the count of theft by deception, guilty. On the count of probation violation, guilty." For a moment, the words hung there, suspended like a held breath. Then Mason snapped. "You're all blind," he shouted, lurching forward, the metal of his handcuffs clattering against the table. Deputies moved instantly, gripping his arms as he strained against them. "This is a setup. She made me do it." Lisa flinched at the outburst, face drained of color. Her body sagged, and before anyone could reach her, she collapsed against her chair, a sound between a sob and a gasp escaping her throat. One deputy steadied her while another signaled for medics waiting outside. The judge banged her gavel once, sharp as thunder. "Order in this court." Ray didn't move. He didn't blink. His eyes stayed on Mason, unflinching, as if he'd been waiting his whole life to see through that man's mask. Mason finally looked back at him, chest heaving, eyes wild. Ray met the stare with something colder than anger: acceptance. In the gallery, Leo's small voice broke the silence only enough to be heard between them. "They heard the truth, Grandpa." He didn't look at his mother. He couldn't. A single tear slid down his cheek, and he wiped it away quickly before anyone noticed. The judge's tone softened as she read her ruling. "Restitution will be paid in full to all registered victims. Assets under Community Relief LLC are hereby seized. Any personal property purchased with misappropriated funds will be auctioned to restore losses." Her gaze landed briefly on Lisa, then Mason. "Sentence to follow at the next hearing." Flashbulbs erupted as soon as she struck the gavel again. The noise outside swelled, reporters shouting questions, doors slamming open, the chaos of justice spilling into public space. Inside, the deputies guided Mason toward the side door, his curses fading into muffled echoes. Lisa stayed slumped forward, her hands trembling. Cruz watched quietly from the aisle, arms crossed, while Kaplan gathered the files on his desk with the precision of a man who knew every page mattered. Ray stood last. He looked once toward the bench, then at the empty spot on the defense table where the envelope of marked bills had sat. He exhaled slowly, steadying his breath. The noise outside grew louder, pressing against the walls. Reporters, cameras, headlines. The world wanted its spectacle. But Ray Whitaker wasn't there for the noise. He stepped into the aisle beside Leo, the boy's hand, finding his without a word. Together, they walked out of the courtroom into the storm of flashbulbs, faces they didn't recognize, voices shouting questions they didn't need to answer. For them, the verdict wasn't the end. It was only the start of whatever came next. The courtroom felt different this time, less charged, more solemn. No cameras waited in the hallway. No reporters huddled for quotes. Only the quiet rhythm of consequence filled the air. The oak blinds were half drawn, filtering daylight into thin stripes that fell across the polished benches. Ari Kaplan stood at the podium, posture straight, expression sharp but composed. Behind him, a screen flickered to life. Rows of names scrolled slowly. Donors, each one paired with a dollar amount. Some were small, $20 checks from retired teachers. Others were large, foundations that had believed in the false promise of Community Relief LLC. The list went on and on, a river of misplaced trust turned into evidence. "Your Honor," Kaplan said, voice steady, "the victims total 83 individuals and 3 organizations. The total restitution owed exceeds $240,000. We have confirmation from the Financial Crimes Unit that all remaining assets seized from the defendants can satisfy those claims in full." The judge nodded, pen poised above her notes. "And the defendant's property?" "The accounts under Ms. Whitaker's name," Kaplan continued, "have been liquidated. She's agreed to sign over the remaining balance, $31,000. At the defense table, Lisa's hand shook as she pressed her signature onto the final document. The sound of the pen scratching paper seemed to echo louder than it should have. She didn't look up. Mason's seat beside her sat empty. His transfer papers had been filed that morning. The judge turned to Ray. "Mr. Whitaker, your mortgage is among the affected accounts. The seized funds will resolve that debt in full. You will retain ownership of your home." Ray cleared his throat but didn't smile. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said softly. Then, after a pause, If there's anything left, I'd like a portion directed to a real veterans charity, one that actually helps. The courtroom stilled. Even the clerk hesitated mid-typing. Kaplan looked at him, faint admiration flickering behind his glasses. That can be arranged, the judge said after a beat, a fitting use of restored funds. From the back row, a woman in a gray cardigan, the same Mrs. Elkins, who had once demanded receipts at that pop-up, clapped once, quietly. Others followed, a soft rustle of hands meeting in quiet affirmation. It wasn't celebration. It was respect. Leo, sitting beside his grandfather, reached out and squeezed his shoulder. Ray didn't look at him, but his eyes softened. The judge spoke again, her tone warm but firm. This hearing isn't just about returning money. It's about restoring faith in process, in accountability, in each other. Kaplan gathered his papers. Cruz stood near the door, arms crossed, a small nod shared between her and Ray as the bailiff called for adjournment. As the benches emptied, Ray lingered. The screen was still scrolling through the last of the donor names, the cursor blinking at the bottom like a heartbeat refusing to fade. Leo closed the laptop Kaplan had left open. "It's over," he whispered. Ray shook his head slowly. "No," he said, eyes still on the screen. "It's fixed. There's a difference." Outside, the winter light poured through the courthouse windows, pale, cold, honest. Justice had arrived, but it hadn't come cheaply. The courthouse steps were lined with microphones, a forest of steel and cables, stretching toward the podium like expectant faces. Reporters murmured into their cameras, the air charged with that strange electricity that comes after justice has been handed down, but before the dust settles. The midday sun bounced off the marble columns, making everything look sharper, too clear, too real. Ray stood at the top of the steps, hands clasped behind his back, the old ring resting in his pocket like an anchor. He wasn't here for spectacle, but the world always wanted a sound bite. Beside him, Leo shifted nervously, clutching a single sheet of paper. Kaplan and Cruz stood a few feet back, quietly watching. A voice called from the press pit. "Mr. Whitaker, will you be making a statement?" Ray looked at the microphones, then down at Leo. "Go ahead, kid," he said softly. "They'll listen to you." Leo hesitated, then stepped up to the podium. The paper in his hand shook once before he steadied it. His voice, when it came, was clear but gentle, the voice of someone who'd seen too much, too young. "We believed in a lie," he read. "We believed in family, in trust, in the good we thought people could do, and we were wrong. But today isn't about what was stolen. It's about what's repaired. The truth costs something, but so does silence. We chose to pay for the truth." The crowd went quiet. No camera clicked, no anchor interrupted. For a moment, even the wind seemed to still. Leo swallowed hard and looked up from the paper. "This city deserves better than what we gave it. My grandpa always says, a man's name is the only thing you can't rebuild once it's gone. We're going to try anyway." He folded the statement and stepped back. The applause was soft, respectful, not the kind born of entertainment, but of relief. Below the steps, 2 sheriff's vehicles waited. Mason was led out in cuffs, chin lifted in defiance that had nowhere left to go. Flashbulbs popped like lightning as he was placed into the car. A few feet away, Lisa stood surrounded by her lawyer and a pair of deputies, tears streaking her face. The sound of her sobs carried faintly up the stone steps. Ray didn't turn toward her, but his jaw clenched once, a silent acknowledgement that grief could live alongside justice. Detective Cruz approached quietly, resting a hand on Leo's shoulder. "That presentation of yours," she said, "made the jury's job easy. You did good." Leo nodded, eyes still on the cars below. "I just showed them what happened." Ray exhaled, long and slow, then started down the steps. The cameras surged forward, questions flying. How does it feel? What comes next? He didn't answer. He just kept walking, the ring in his pocket pressing against his palm, a reminder of the life he'd built and nearly lost. As he and Leo reached the bottom of the steps, the crowd parted. The reporters lowered their microphones. The city, for a rare moment, recognized what grown-ups looked like. Not the loudest, not the proudest, but the ones who endured, told the truth, and kept walking. And Ray did just that. Past the flashbulbs, past the noise, into the cold Cleveland air that smelled, finally, like something close to clean. The bank lobby was quiet, just the low hum of printers and the soft shuffle of paper. Ray sat across from the branch manager's desk, hands folded in his lap. On the polished wood between them lay a small envelope, heavy with meaning. The manager slid it across the table, his expression somewhere between professional courtesy and quiet respect. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, "your mortgage is cleared and the lien's been voided. These belong to you again." Ray stared at the keys before picking them up. The metal was cold against his palm, but it wasn't just metal. It was memory, foundation, promise. He nodded once, unable to find words. The manager stood and offered a handshake. "Not many people fight their way back like this," he said. "You did it by the book." Outside, the late afternoon light was pale and forgiving. Leo was waiting by the truck, toolbox open on the tailgate. "Got the new locks," he said. "Kaplan said we should switch them out just to be sure." Together they drove home, their home. The front yard was overgrown, the porch railing needed paint, and the gutters sagged, but it was theirs again. Leo got to work immediately, kneeling at the door frame, removing the old locks with careful, methodical turns. Each screw came out with a small metallic sigh, like the house itself was exhaling after a long, held breath. When the last lock clattered free, Leo dropped it into an old shoebox. "Trash day tomorrow?" he asked. Ray shook his head. "Keep them. Remind us what happens when we stop paying attention." Leo closed the lid and set it aside. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows through the windows. The house was mostly empty now, the furniture gone, the rooms echoing, but somehow it felt more alive than it had in years. Mrs. Novak appeared just before sunset, a familiar silhouette against the doorway. She carried a warm pie in a foil pan, the scent of cinnamon and butter trailing behind her. "Welcome home," she said softly, eyes glinting. Then, with a little smile, she added, "For real this time." Ray smiled, a small genuine thing that surprised even him. "Thank you, Ellen," he said, his voice rough, "for watching when we couldn't." She nodded, leaving the pie on the kitchen counter, before slipping quietly back into the evening. Ray wandered through the living room, his boots creaking against the bare floorboards. He stopped at the mantel where a small ceramic dish waited, the same one that had sat untouched since his wife passed. Carefully, he pulled the ring from his pocket and set it inside. The faint clink echoed through the house. For a long moment, he just stood there. Leo walked up beside him, a small wooden sign in his hand, letters carved unevenly but proud. He hung it above the doorway. "No more lies." Ray looked around the room, the cracks, the dust, the honesty of it all, and finally felt the tension leave his chest. For the first time in months, he inhaled deep. The air tasted clean, breathable. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt earned. The church basement smelled faintly of coffee and cleaning solution, the kind of place where small recoveries happened quietly. Folding chairs circled a metal table, and a few paper cups sat forgotten near the urn. Ray arrived first, early as always, his hands clasped in front of him, unsure what to expect. The room was calm, almost too calm, and that made the waiting worse. Lisa stepped through the door 10 minutes late. Her hair was pulled back, her clothes plain. She looked smaller, as if guilt itself had trimmed her edges. "Hi, Dad," she said softly, her voice cracking on the second word. Her hands trembled around the strap of her purse. Ray nodded, offering her a seat. The air between them was thick with all the things they hadn't said. She sat, eyes glistening, the weight of silence unbearable. Finally, she spoke. "I thought love would save me," she whispered. "I thought if I kept believing in him, it would all turn out right. That's what Mom used to say, remember? That love fixes people." Ray leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Love doesn't bill your father," he said quietly. The words weren't cruel, just clean, like a blade that needed to be sharp to cut through fog. Lisa looked down, a tear slipping off her chin. "I know," she said. "I know, Dad." Footsteps echoed softly down the hall. Leo appeared in the doorway, hesitant, clutching a notebook he wasn't really writing in. Lisa's eyes widened. "Leo," she breathed, standing halfway before stopping herself. "I didn't know you'd be here." The boy looked at her for a long second before saying anything. "Grandpa said you wanted to talk." Lisa nodded, swallowing hard. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, her voice trembling. "But I need you to know I'm sorry. For everything. For what I took. For what I broke." Her face twisted, but she forced the words out. "You didn't deserve any of it." Leo nodded once, slowly. His voice was steady, but his eyes were wet. "I just wanted my mom back, not all that." Lisa pressed a shaking hand over her mouth. "I'm trying," she said. "I really am." Ray reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper, an address, a phone number. "There's a counselor who works with financial crime victims and families," he said. "Good woman. She'll help you untangle this the right way." He set the paper on the table. "And there's a job opening at a veterans outreach office downtown. Entry level, paperwork, steady work. If you want it, Kaplan can put in a word." Lisa blinked at him, startled. "You're not giving me money?" Ray shook his head. "No checks, no shortcuts." She nodded slowly, shame pressing down, but not crushing her entirely. "Okay," she whispered. "That's fair." They sat there for a long while, the hum of the basement lights filling the silence. When they finally stood, Ray extended his hand, not for reconciliation, but for agreement. "Boundaries," he said. Lisa took it, her grip trembling but real. "Boundaries," she repeated. Outside, the evening light filtered through the stained glass, painting the hallway in fractured color. Red, gold, blue, and something faintly like hope. The final hearing drew a smaller crowd than the trial had, but the air was thicker somehow, the kind of stillness that comes before something final drops. The judge entered, robe trailing, and everyone rose. When they sat again, the courtroom seemed to exhale together. Mason Holt sat at the defense table in a fresh suit that couldn't hide the wear behind his eyes. He looked thinner, older, stripped of the charm that once made people believe him. Beside him, Lisa sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, a tissue crushed between her fingers. She hadn't slept. It showed. The judge cleared her throat, her voice firm but tired. "Mr. Holt," she began, "you've spent a lifetime finding loopholes and manipulating trust. You hid behind good causes and family names. The court finds no reason to believe you've changed." She glanced down at the papers before her. "You are hereby sentenced to 12 years in state prison, with mandatory restitution and forfeiture of assets already seized." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Mason's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. Only when the bailiff moved closer did he speak, a whisper more to himself than anyone else. "Could have been worse." Then the judge turned her gaze toward Lisa. The silence deepened. "Ms. Whitaker," she said gently, "you participated in these crimes willingly, even if under influence. But you also cooperated, providing information that supported the investigation. You will receive 5 years of probation, 1,000 hours of community service, and continued restitution payments. You are also ordered to attend counseling." Lisa nodded through tears, her voice breaking. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge paused before continuing. "You should thank your father. And your son. Without them, this courtroom might have seen you on the same side of that sentence. At that, she looked toward Leo, seated next to Kaplan and Ray. And as for you, young man, she said, her tone softening, the community owes you thanks. You did what many adults could not, brought truth to light. The courtroom filled with quiet applause before the bailiff hushed it. Outside, reporters would later type their headlines in bold, "Teen exposes fake charity scam." It would spread through local stations by evening, Leo's picture on the screen, his face calm but unreadable. Ray sat through it all, unmoved by victory or vindication. Justice didn't taste sweet. It never did. He watched as the deputies led Mason away, chains clinking softly against the tile. Lisa sat frozen, head in her hands, her sobs low but endless. Detective Cruz approached the row behind them, her badge catching the light. She extended her hand to Ray. "You did good," she said simply. Ray shook his head. "Just did what needed doing." Cruz smiled faintly. "That's what good usually looks like." When the courtroom began to empty, Ray stood, slipping his wife's ring back into his pocket. The sound of the door closing behind Mason was heavy. But it wasn't the end. It was the first moment of quiet after months of storm. Lisa wiped her eyes, still trembling. Leo leaned closer to Ray. "Is it over now?" he whispered. Ray looked straight ahead, toward the bench where Justice had just spoken, and answered softly, "Not over. Just starting to heal." Outside, the courthouse bell tolled noon, marking the end of one chapter, and the slow, careful beginning of what came next. Spring came slow to Cleveland, the kind of thaw that didn't rush, but rebuilt everything inch by inch. On Ray's kitchen table, the morning sunlight spilled across papers, foundation documents, donor agreements, the charter for something new. At the top, typed in clean black ink, it read, "The Whitaker Integrity Fund." Leo sat across from him, typing steadily on his laptop. "It sounds official now," he said. "Mission statement, bylaws, tax ID. You're legit, Grandpa." Ray smiled faintly. "Not me, kid. Us. This isn't about payback. It's about making something that lasts longer than anger." The fund's purpose was simple: to support teens working in civic technology, young minds building tools for transparency, ethics, and digital honesty. The same skills Leo had used to expose corruption were now being shaped into opportunity. The first grant was already approved, a small check to a local veterans nonprofit whose website had been hacked the year before. "They'll get a secure platform this time," Leo said, "and free tech training for their volunteers." Ray nodded, eyes softening. "That's how it should have been all along." They sat in silence for a while, the hum of the old refrigerator filling the space where tension used to live. Revenge had burned through them both. Now only structure remained, measured, deliberate, alive with purpose. Later that week, Ray stopped by a community shelter on the west side, carrying a box of donated laptops. He didn't expect to see Lisa there, kneeling beside a folding table sorting canned goods. Her hair was tied back, her sweatshirt plain, sleeves rolled to the elbows. She looked up, but didn't stand. "Hey," she said quietly. "Hey," he replied, setting the box down. For a moment, neither spoke. She gestured toward the shelves. "They're short on volunteers. I come Tuesdays." Ray nodded once. "Good." There was no speech, no forgiveness ceremony, just two people standing in a place that smelled of soup and clean effort, both doing work that didn't ask for applause. When Ray left, the sky was turning gold over the lake. He walked slowly to the truck, breathing in air that no longer felt heavy. The world wasn't fixed, not by a long shot, but for the first time, it was facing the right direction. He glanced at the foundation papers on the seat beside him. "Integrity Fund," he murmured. "Not a bad start." And for the first time since the nightmare began, revenge didn't feel like the end of something. It felt like the beginning. The sun rose slow and shy over Lake Erie, its light spilling like pale gold across the rippling water. The shoreline was quiet except for the faint hiss of waves meeting stone. Ray stood near the edge, hands in his jacket pockets, the cold biting his knuckles in that familiar Cleveland way. Beside him, Leo crouched low, testing the weight of a flat rock in his palm. He flicked it toward the water. It skipped once, twice, 3 times before sinking. "Not bad," Ray said, voice gravel soft. Leo smiled faintly. "Not bad for a kid, huh?" They stood there for a long while, just watching the horizon breathe. The air smelled clean, wet stone, lake salt, and something like renewal. The city behind them was still waking up, but out here, it felt like the world had paused long enough for 2 people to catch up to it. Ray picked up his own stone, rubbed it with his thumb, and sent it sailing. It hit the surface hard and dove straight down with no skip at all. He chuckled under his breath. "Guess I'm out of practice." Leo looked up at him, that small, knowing smile crossing his face. "You were busy fighting the world." Ray's eyes softened, the lines around them deepening. "You made grown people cry, you know that?" he said, almost proud, almost mournful. Leo's grin faded to something quieter. "Only because you didn't." The words landed like a reflection, simple but true. Ray turned to him, studying the boy's face, seeing his wife's steadiness there, his own stubborn streak too. "You talk like an old man sometimes." "Only when I have to," Leo said, flicking another stone. This one skipped 5 times before disappearing into the glare of morning light. Ray laughed, a low, honest sound that came from somewhere deep in his chest. "You win this round," he said. "Grandpa," Leo said softly, eyes still on the water, "we didn't just win. We fixed something." Ray nodded, not trusting his voice enough to answer. He put an arm around Leo's shoulders, pulling him close against the lake wind. The boy leaned into him without a word. For a moment, everything felt balanced again. The lake, the morning, the silence between them. 2 survivors, not of violence, but of truth. Ray squinted toward the horizon, the first fishing boats drifting into view. "Let's go home," he said quietly. Leo nodded. As they turned towards the truck, the water caught the rising sun, bright, unbroken, endless. Ari Kaplan's office lights glowed warm against the gray Cleveland morning. The stack of papers on his desk was thinner now, the last remnants of the Whitaker case reduced to a few signatures and an embossed seal. He slipped the final forms into a large envelope, double-checking the return address before pressing the flap closed. In neat black ink, he wrote, "R. Whitaker, Personal Records." When he dropped it into the outgoing mail bin, the sound was small, almost forgettable, but it carried the weight of an entire war, finally logged and finished. Across town, Ray found the envelope waiting in his mailbox later that afternoon. He carried it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and stared at it for a long time before breaking the seal. The documents inside were simple: title reinstatement, mortgage cleared, restitution finalized, house fully restored. The words blurred for a second before settling into place. He exhaled slowly, the air leaving his chest like something that had been trapped there for years. He opened the drawer by the sink and took out the ring box, the one that had held his wife's wedding band since the day she passed. The metal gleamed softly in the fading light. He pulled a fresh sheet of paper from the notepad by the phone and began to write in his slow, careful handwriting. "Ellen," he began, "the house is ours again. I fixed what broke. It took too long and it cost too much. But it's clean now. Clean like you'd want it. The boy's stronger than I was at his age, maybe stronger than both of us. You'd be proud of him. You'd tell me to stop staring backward. I'm trying." He folded the note and slipped it into the ring box beside the band, closing it gently. The click sounded final, but peaceful. The phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Lisa, Just one photo, her in a reflective vest, sleeves rolled up, hauling boxes at a community shelter. No filters, no smiles, just real. Beneath it, a message, one day at a time. Ray stared at the screen for a moment before typing back 2 words, keep going. He set the phone down beside the open envelope, the papers neatly stacked like balance sheets finally evened. Outside, the wind swept across the empty street, carrying with it the faint smell of spring rain, new, raw, and clean. For the first time in years, Ray Whitaker's ledger matched his conscience. The evening settled over Cleveland like a promise kept. The Whitaker porch, once a symbol of loss and quiet shame, was now alive with the low hum of conversation and the smell of barbecue smoke drifting through the air. Folding chairs dotted the yard, laughter mingled with the hiss of the grill, and for the first time in years, Ray's house sounded like a home again. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles and pie, the same ones who had once whispered uncertainly when everything fell apart. Now, they came to share food, not pity. Mrs. Novak fussed over the potato salad. "You didn't burn the ribs this time, did you, Ray?" she teased, and the laughter that followed was the easy kind, the sound of normal life returning. Detective Cruz leaned against the railing, trading small talk with Kaplan. "I still can't believe this porch survived the storm," she said. Kaplan smiled. "Some structures are built stronger than paperwork." Ray chuckled quietly from behind the grill, tongs in hand. "That's because paperwork burns faster." Leo sat at the picnic table, a small framed print wrapped in brown paper resting in his lap. When the plates were filled and the noise quieted to a soft murmur, he stood. "I made something," he said, voice a little shaky but proud. "A reminder." He unwrapped the frame and turned it around. Inside, against a white background, were 3 bold words: truth, fear. Simple, clean, powerful. Below it, the faint diagram of their case, the one that had brought everything crashing down, now transformed into art. Cruz smiled first. Kaplan followed, nodding. A few of the neighbors clapped softly. Ray looked at the frame for a long moment, his throat tightening. "You should hang that in the hallway," he said. Leo shook his head. "No, out here." He set it on the porch table where the light would hit it every night. As dusk deepened, Ray reached up and flipped the switch beside the door. The porch light came on, a steady, warm glow cutting through the twilight. It wasn't fancy, just an old bulb behind clean glass, but it cast a circle of comfort across the yard. The same house that once hid pain now held light. Everyone fell quiet for a moment, watching that soft beam stretch across the grass. Then, in the final calm, Ray's voice, steady, reflective, rose over the faint crackle of the grill. "They stole our savings," he said. "We took back our story." The light hummed above them, unwavering, as night settled in around the house that had finally, truly, come home.